Hello there, Eric here, your learning futurist. This video, I'm going to try and break down my thoughts on the Epic Games versus Apple lawsuit. A lot of this is framing the conversation about how this idea of a monopoly having the power of the walled garden versus the developers and the ability for users to choose how they purchase and who they would like to support in their uh, online purchases is coming to a head. And a lot about this trial is kind of framed in the wrong way, which I'll try and talk about in this video about Epic versus Apple. Coming up. Right. So if you've been living under a rock and you don't know about Apple versus Epic Games, um, Epic Games makes a game called Fortnite, and it really blew up last year, one of the most popular games, and grew and got so much revenue so quick, so fast. I believe it broke some records. And they, of course, have all these in-app purchases, extra skins, make your characters look differently, and different dances they can do. Um, and Apple, of course, takes a 30% cut of all those purchases within that go through the Apple App Store. And Epic didn't like this. They kind of made some changes to their app, which kind of circumvented that system for in-app purchases through Apple products through the App Store. And so they could both charge a lower rate to customers and gain more revenue from their customers. Who's right on this? Ethically, I think they're both have good and valid, invalid points. Basically, it's in many ways this is a a competition of growth at any cost and maybe a little bit of greed over revenue. They can both step back a little bit aggressively on this both on this issue, in my opinion. But there's a lot of things that came out in the court case, a lot of things that relate to perhaps the future of being able to make choices uh, about your purchases and your freedom to be able to develop products for different platforms and what you can and cannot do on them that might come out on this and set some precedents moving towards the future. So I think it's very important to talk about. Right. So one reason why I think that this lawsuit, which is claiming that the App Store for Apple is a monopoly, is not quite so helpful. The terminology is not quite so helpful. I understand that you need a legal framework and um, a legal concept to go after Apple for this. But this is something, in my mind, entirely different, entirely new, similar, and they have different kind of anti-competitive behaviors and things related to them. But to call it monopoly probably is not very helpful, especially to developers and users for this purpose. Right, so I'm going to be coming back to this idea of monopoly versus ecosystem quite often in this video because I think this is more of the conversation that we need to start having around these ideas because they both are into steering customers. Monopolies, uh, you don't have any choice, therefore your behavior as a customer, where you can go, what you can do, how you can buy it, the price, etc., etc., is made for the customer. And ecosystems do a lot of the same thing. Apple, in this case, spends a lot of time, a lot of money, much of it to the consumer's good because then they control the privacy, the security that's involved with it. But it's an ecosystem nonetheless. A lot of developers refer to this as the walled garden, giving their users a garden from which the flowers are beautiful, meaning the apps run beautifully, they're very useful, but the design of it is to keep you in that space, do not let you go to a competitor, do not let you get out of their data collection kind of realm. And the same is very much true for Apple. You're in that ecosystem. You are basically in that walled garden everything Apple, you buy Apple through the App Store. Apps are controlled and even kind of helps that design process. This is a big thing for Apple. One of the big selling points and expectations as customers is things being user friendly, easy to use, and things just work correctly. So they have an interest to control what's going on to their app store, and they exercise that control to a great extent, in my opinion. So one kind of example that I can share with you, uh, I talked about a couple of weeks ago on my YouTube video. I'll put a link in the description. Is this man suing Apple because he got his Apple ID revoked from him and basically lost all of the content that he had purchased. All of the movies, music, apps, subscriptions that he had was worth about $24,000, which he lost because he lost his Apple ID. So when thinking about monopoly versus ecosystem, you're kind of trapped. If you have an iPhone, if you have an iPad, maybe an Apple TV, you've purchased a bunch of things. The switching costs to get out of that walled garden, to climb over that wall, it grows over time. Those walls get higher. And so it's really not a monopoly. You have the choice to leave, but because you're in that ecosystem, it becomes increasingly difficult to do so. I personally jumped out of Apple's walled garden a couple of years ago. I had an iPhone 5, I think that was my last one. I just had a terrible experience going to the actual physical Apple store here in Japan, and so I moved to Apple. I'm kind of I wouldn't say a super user, but I like the freedom to do things I want and spend the extra time to make sure my stuff's semi secure and private, even though that's very arguable that it is. But anyway, ecosystem, right? You're trapped in that ecosystem depending on how much time you spent in it, how much money you've spent in it, and how many devices you have, right? So not necessarily a monopoly, but it's an ecosystem. And I'm probably going to keep coming back to that kind of concept as we move through this video. This is, of course, is huge business. The result precedent that this case sets is going to mean huge money because Apple and Google get both cuts of the purchases and the transactions that happen within their app. Mainly, this is in-app purchases and subscriptions. And the gaming industry really pays probably a large percentage to the percentage of apps that are actually on the store, because a lot of the business models around the apps are either doing advertising or they're doing in-app purchases to gamify and doing these microtransactions, in which Google gets a cut of. This does not apply to a lot of other places. Famously, Amazon is not paying a commission because they're selling products, which Amazon is getting commission of from the normal sellers. That's a whole nother kind of similar kind of trajectory, similar track on the consumer end of things. But on the digital end of things, yes. Games have a lot of purchases and they're supporting the App Store probably disproportionately to a lot of other apps. Things like banking, these digital transaction apps that are going around like PayPay and PayPal and things like that, and banking systems. Uh, Amazon, of course, don't pay these commissions, but digital things do. So that was one argument that came out in the case as well. Right. So the judge here, Judge Yvonne Gonzalez Rogers, on the last day of the trial, asked a bunch of questions directly to Tim Cook. And this was probably the most telling in my kind of idea of this kind of question of a monopoly kind of not being the most helpful in kind of framing the conversation. So she got to ask questions directly to both Epic representatives and Tim Cook, the president of Apple, directly. And a lot of what came out of those questions on the last day of the trial were really telling about all of this. So let's go through some of those. So first, the judge was asking Tim Cook about basically why. Why must there be one Apple App Store? Why must you charge 30% or 15% on all of these things? Why not let competitors do that, see if they can do it better than you? Wouldn't that actually serve your customers well, and in the end, you and your products? And so the original pushback, the original instinct for Tim Cook, of course, is to say we're not thinking about the money, that we're thinking about the users, which is a pretty valid argument. It's brought up many times during the trial that Apple apps are more secure and more private than those on the rival Google Play Store, because they're so tightly controlled and they curate apps coming in to the process more tightly. Yes, that's a great argument to have. But right in that same vein, that same argument, that same line of questioning, uh, the judge was asking about the difference between 15%, 30%. If that was, oh, if you had competition on that, wouldn't you be kind of incentivized to have to compete on those commissions? You have to be sued to kind of change those commissions levels after having complaints about it through many of your developers in the store. And he comes back with, if we're not allowed to charge commissions, we wouldn't get a return on investment. So you're a business. Again, this is growth. Epic wants their cut. Apple wants their cut. They're just fighting over bigger pieces of the pie here in this case. But as a consumer, as a developer, we just want better products and more freedom and better security. All those things are kind of conflicting as far as what we want too. But on the Epic versus Apple argument right here, they're basically wanting bigger pieces of the revenue. And so this may be a good time to talk about my own personal experience with this and going through the App Store. I have an augmented reality app called Orientation on the App Store. It's meant to give a free alternative to using augmented reality for learning environments for teachers. And it was not approved at first by Apple. It was approved right away by Google. But the reason that Apple came back to me and made me go through some extra hoops was not because of security, was not because of privacy. The way my app's set up could could people could using it could see anything they want. So they weren't trying to necessarily control the content. They got back to me, denied me at least 2 times trying to get into the App Store because they were not able to secure, or were not convinced at a high enough level that I wasn't trying to create any revenue from the product. I had to resubmit some terms of service and show my website that I wasn't taking in any money whatsoever. So really, that curation process, at least in my experience, was not about security whatsoever. It was more about making sure that Apple was in on all of the possible in-app purchases using that app that I was trying to put on the store. There could be some other security concerns, but there was nothing that they came to me about. It was all about we need to make sure that you're not using your website or using the go-through of the augmented reality ability of your app to show in-app purchases that we're not in control of. So that's my own kind of experience with that. Right. So this is the most telling and most kind of the line that we kind of have to break apart, dig into the most as far as this whole conversation around monopoly versus ecosystem, right? So the judge was asking, so why not let the developers put a link in the description of their app or in their app somewhere where they could go to a website or some other system so they can get the purchase or whatever that is in store cheaper without your commission, or compete on a different store with similar security precautions, et cetera, et cetera. And the reply to this was, it would be like having a sign, as if you're Nordstrom's, telling everybody to go buy a product at Macy's. And there's a whole, this is not a good analogy on many different levels, because Nordstrom's and Macy's is a store. Even though the app is called the App Store, it's not a store. It's part of an ecosystem. So it's not giving the opportunity for customers to go across the way to Google, because in this case, Apple owns the entire mall, manages the entire mall. And not only that, the things inside of the mall, they control the flow of money within it. So at Nordstrom's, you can choose to pay with Visa, MasterCard, et cetera, et cetera. On the Google App Store, you have to go through the purchase system of the App Store, from which Apple will automatically take their cut. So it's not a good analogy by any means. And on top of that, they're competing within these stores as well. Um, so being able for the developers to say, hey, you can go purchase this extra thing inside the app on our website at this price, or you can buy it now at this price. Then you would have to compete on price, but if you're a user, you already have your credit card in that ecosystem, you know it's going to be a secure payment. If that argument holds true that Apple is the most secure, most convenient way to do things, that ecosystem's kind of concept for them would automatically give them revenue, and they should also have to compete with developers developing good things and the users that use them wanting to support those things even more. So maybe that is a good argument, maybe it isn't. You can let me know what you think. But I'll tell you why I think Apple is going to win this case. Because there's already some decent precedent set on it. Maybe Apple won't win the war. There's already several other lawsuits on Apple and Google around having to go through the App Store to make these purchases. But this particular case, and even the same law firm, I think is representing Epic on the other side of the issue, interestingly, is Ohio versus American Express. And this case is similar, and it sets a precedent, I think, for this Epic versus Apple case. So Ohio decided to represent a bunch of merchants in the state. And merchants in the state were, of course, selling items in their stores, services, and of course, customers of these stores can purchase with a variety of different credit cards, American Express among them. But American Express charges a much higher fee and surcharge to merchants to use their card. So merchants, of course, would prefer if customers use Visa or MasterCard, probably even more so cash, because if things are set all at the same price, they get more of the money directly to the store and less commissions go to the credit card companies, especially American Express, because it's higher than the others. And so the merchants wanted to communicate in some fashion to customers that, hey, if you like our store, we like what you do for you, you can support us even more. You can help us out by using a Visa or MasterCard. We'll get more money directly. It'll give your money more directly to us instead of the credit card company to process the transaction. Well, American Express had it in their terms of service, much like the App Store or Apple has it in their terms of service, that you cannot allow people to go elsewhere to purchase things. It was American Express told the merchants that they were not able to steer, back to the steering thing, not able to steer customers in any way away from American Express. Mainly, there couldn't be a sign in the store saying, this is what American Express charges us, so you might want to consider that when you choose a card to pay for your items, etc., etc. And so Ohio tried to represent a bunch of merchants, claiming this as uncompetitive behavior, right? Maybe they should have to compete on that surcharge with with Visa and MasterCard, and not just have to stipulate that they can't tell customers that it is a different rate. Because, of course, merchants want to have a MasterCard available, because the more cards that are available, the more chances they have to sell something to their customer. American Express won this case. It seems to me like this is obviously anti-competitive behavior, but it was ruled that it is not in violation of antitrust laws to kind of curb the steering of merchants when using these cards. So if this is any indication of um, how these things might turn out, I think this is bad news for Epic in this case. However, one huge thing, and this is where I start to get into my own opinions about this even deeper, um, is the next wave of lawsuits coming on. This is where I say I think Apple's losing the battle here, but they're still very much in danger of losing the war. So um, Google is going after Apple and the App Store also because they're claiming that they're both the merchant and the competitor, and they're anti-competitive with their own products and services competing in the store that they manage, right? So Spotify is the uh, most upfront example of this. Spotify is a music service. They have, of course, they have to be in the Apple ecosystem because it's a lot of their customers are there. So they have to pay that 30% surcharge. They have to be holden to Apple's terms of service. They have to let Apple gain a large amount of the data that's being that flows through the Apple Store App Store process. But they have a competing service in Apple Music, and they're starting to steer possibly uh, customers away. And of course, Spotify has to compete on a price at a 30% surcharge with it. And so Apple, in this case, is not only owning the store and the process through it, they're also putting their own service, their competition, at an advantage because they are closer to that ecosystem within it. So in my mind, and this is my opinion as well, perhaps if you're going to make Apple's claim that you are providing customers with value in security and privacy and curating these apps, perhaps that you shouldn't be allowed to compete in there as well with the same apps and services, right? So it's against Apple's interests. It's a conflict of interest for them to kind of keep Spotify as free and competitive as possible when they have a competing item here. They could have extra things connected to the ecosystem, to the iPhones, the apps, even on a hardware level, on a network level, on a bunch of different levels that would let that their own competitive have an advantage over it. So what do you got? What do you think? This is upcoming next in this battle for Apple and the App Store. Google is already in trouble in Europe as well for similar reasons. Um, that's just my own opinion about it. Right. So I have a whole bunch more to say about this topic, but I think I'll leave it there. I hope to hear your opinions about what's happening between Epic Games and Apple and what it means for especially young people trying to gain opportunity moving forward, being an educator, using digital means, trying to make that more fair, make more opportunity for them moving forward. And that's what I really hope to get out of this, and that's why I'm a little bit frustrated about the way it's being framed between these two giants. All right then. Uh, I'm Eric, your learning futurist. Might touch on this subject later in the future, but for now, I will sign off. Thanks, guys.